Good evening, everyone, and welcome, very warm welcome to tonight's SIGCyber webinar. My name is Kerry Lynn Thompson. I'm a professor in the School of IT at Nelson Mandela University, as well as the current chair for SIGCyber. Now, SIGCyber is the special interest group for cybersecurity within the IITPSA. And what we've been doing is running a series of webinars on Cybersecurity 101, getting back to the foundations of cybersecurity, important things like third-party risk management, incident response, etc. Tonight, though, we are looking at people. We're looking at the employees of organizations and how we can go about managing that human aspect, the all-important aspect of cybersecurity and the people in our organizations. Now, to help us with this is our speaker tonight. We're very excited to welcome Anna Collard. Anna is an SVP for Content Strategy and a cybersecurity evangelist at KnowBe4 Africa. Anna and her work is world-renowned. And like I said, we're very excited to have her here. Anna founded Popcorn Training, which was acquired by KnowBe4 back in 2018. Anna has an MSc in cyber psychology and has won numerous awards, the latest being the top female tech entrepreneur in 2025. So Anna, thank you so much for guiding us through this topic of Digital Mindfulness 101, building cyber resilience from within. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks. Anna, sorry, we can't hear you at the moment. We could hear you just now. No, it's still nothing. Okay, am I audible? Can everyone hear me? Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
We still can't hear you, Anna.
Okay, Anna's just going to join us again. So just give us okay, you can hear us, thank goodness. Okay, yeah, just give us a couple minutes, some technical difficulties on this side. Anna's going to join us again soon. Just a note while we're waiting, for those of you who are not familiar with Webinar Jam, on the right, I see many people have found the chat already. If there's any questions that you'd like to ask Anna after the fact, you'll see on the side of chat, there's another tab that says Q&A only. And that's if you have a particular question for Anna or myself to address a little bit later. Okay, Anna's back. Can we hear her?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Ah, thank God. Yeah, sometimes it's just going back in and out. Apologies for that, everyone. Don't know what happened. We did the whole test early on and it worked, but Murphy's, in life situations. So yeah, thanks so much again for having me. Early on when you couldn't hear me, I said it's a real honor to be here, particularly with Kerry Lynn, who I have a lot of respect for and that I'm privileged to be a student under actually at the moment. Yeah, so digital mindfulness and cybersecurity awareness 101, security culture 101, this is sort of what I'm hoping to cover today. But before I do that, I would like to ask you all a couple of questions, and hopefully you can just silently, really honestly answer for yourselves. And the first one is the question of, do you feel that you have untapped potential that you haven't fully realized yet? And then the second question I would like to ask you is whether you feel that at times you could be outgoing and sociable and really enjoy people, while at other times do you prefer to be alone and recharge by yourself? And the last question I'd like to ask you is whether you feel that at times you can be totally focused and in the zone, while at other times you procrastinate. So and let's be honest here, even if there was a small part of you that felt this is actually me, or this applies to me, then what happened is that you have been Barnumed, or that a certain effect called the Barnum effect, or also the Forer effect, was at play here. And what that is something that your horoscope writers, your psychics, your on-stage magicians, as well as scammers use to trick you into believing what we say is true. And the way this works, what this Barnum, he was actually a showman, he owned a circus in the 19th century. What he realized is that people tend to believe things more if they hear a statement that sounds true in the beginning, and particularly if that statement is generic enough that it can apply to everybody, which all of these statements earlier on were, then whatever comes next, you tend to believe more, and you're more open to it. So I'm hoping that if you believed any of those statements before, that you're going to believe the rest of my presentation too. But just something to remember, that when you read the horoscope, or when you read things that seem very true and that are applicable to you, just question that maybe it's a Barnum effect at play, and it's actually something that applies to everyone, and that is a deceptive mechanism or a tool for manipulation. And yeah, so my background is in cybersecurity. I've been there for over 22 years, and you know, Carrie Lynn has heard me tell this story multiple times, but as a security professional who spent the last 10 years purely in educating people how not to click on phishing emails, you would think that somebody like me never clicks on phishing emails and is super safe online. And generally that's maybe true, but something that happened about, now it's like 2 or 3 years ago, and I'd like to take you with me. I was in an Uber car, and I was driving to get my car back from the service. It was already after dark in Cape Town. And I was talking to the driver, I was packing my bag, and at the same time, bad idea, I was checking my emails on my phone. And I kid you not, in that particular moment, I got this phishing email that you can see here on the slides. And, as a security professional, obviously, if you look at this, it's a very easy to spot phishing email. It uses a low-grade form of fear. I should have just reported this as a fish, but in that moment something happened and I clicked on it, and then as a consequence or punishment, I had to take training that I've developed myself, which was just, by the way. So this really true story, and I thought this can't be true. I'm the security professional, I cannot be taken through my own training. I know how to spot a phishing email, I know how to hover over URLs to verify. I know all this stuff. But what was interesting is that our IT department at the time sent out a survey asking me, what happened when you failed this test? And luckily, by the way, this was not a real phishing email. This was just a simulated phishing email that our security team sends out to test us. And I thought this is really interesting, because that data that they collect in these surveys is fascinating, because technically, all my colleagues, anyone who works for KnowBe4, we are a security awareness, a security training company. We shouldn't be failing these phishing tests, but we do. And I asked them to share the data with me, and you can see here that in half, or about 53% of the cases, people fail these tests not because of a lack of training, because believe me, we really get trained a lot. No, we do so because we're busy, multitasking, distracted, stressed, whatever the case might be. And this really led me down this whole path of the research project that I'm now actually busy with, under Carrie Lynn, to look at this from a much more, psychological and deeper perspective. Like, what's going on here? Why can't we, even specialists or experts who know how to not be tricked or conned or manipulated online, why do we still make these mistakes? And it isn't just, this is, by the way, is a very it's not just a KnowBe4 problem, it's worldwide. It's sort of the statistics are at the halfway mark or 50% mark of where people fail phishing tests, not because of a lack of training, but because their state of mind was one that's distracted and multitasking. Yes, and then what are we going to talk about today? So this is really the intro into why I'm so fascinated by this topic, because I'm one of those people who makes these mistakes, and we all know human error. As much as we'd like to fix everything with technology, and we obviously have to implement security technology as much as possible to prevent human error from causing a security incident, but at the end of the day, there is still an element of reliance on the human component or the human element. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the signs of deception and what makes us vulnerable or susceptible to that. But then ultimately, it's how can we as security practitioners in our organizations address this and build so-called human risk management or security cultures. And, social engineering or the human factor is really also on the African continent, by the way, it is one of the main issues or the biggest problems when it comes to cybersecurity in general. This is just a recent report that Interpol released. That's the African cyber threat report. And what this is obviously, this is based off reports that the law enforcement agencies get from the various member states. And you can see here that online scams and phishing, followed by sort of business email compromise, online harassment, extortion, ransomware, those are the top or most frequently reported cyber incidents on the African continent. And all of those have a component of social engineering wrapped in. Even ransomware in most cases starts with either a social engineering attempt, a credential theft, or an unpatched system. But in many, many cases, it's that human element in the beginning of the attack chain, of the kill chain, that gets exploited to compromise a system, a network, or in some cases, like with a email compromise, the human himself or herself to do, for example, unauthorized transactions or payments. And I believe that this is much more about psychology than it is about technology. And the criminals know that, and they use manipulative psychological tactics to trick us. And often the challenge is that, this problem of addressing the human risk gets lumped into cybersecurity, which is a technology domain. And we come at it with a technology mindset, while this is actually a much different, much more, not just ones and zeros. It's a very messy kind of human psychology space that is a bit more gray than maybe what we are used to in the technical or technology realm. And if we look at the signs of deception, and this has been around way before technology, but the same narrative still applies today, is that it starts off with an actor or, sort of an identity that has a motivation. The motivation could be that I want my target to believe something or change their belief structure, for example, in disinformation campaigns, or I want to, steal information or money, whatever that might be. So it starts off with the motivation. And that motivation then is the foundation for a storyline. And the storyline can then use different artifacts. The artifact could be a deepfake, for example, or a phishing email to deliver my deception and ultimately exploit a human vulnerability. And then if it goes well for the attacker, that is, we have the incident, the compromise, or a victim at the end of the day. And something that's really important, again, is, when we talk about deepfakes particularly, is that, people talk about, but why don't we have technology that detects deepfakes? And there are certain, solutions in place that will help with that. They can also be very easily circumvented, by the way. In fact, just a short little story around that. My colleague, Perry Carpenter, what he did is he showed that just by adding background noises in a deepfake video. So you're changing the audio track with like a post-editing software, like adding a bit of car noises in the background. You can fool most of the deepfake detection software sort of solutions that are out there right now. And he tested 8 of the most popular ones and got through all of them by just doing that little bit of a post-edit technique that is really not sophisticated if somebody is motivated enough. But coming back to the deception storyline, whether it's a super well done deepfake or it's a cheap fake like Trump so famously used with in the meeting with Ramaphosa, or existing content that's not even fake but in the wrong context. All of this can be used in this deceptive storyline. So it's not actually the quality of the fake per se, it's the storyline and how plausible the storyline is that makes a deception or a manipulation attempt successful. And then if we think about why is that, well, we are humans, we have evolved to a certain extent, but our brains are still wired for survival in a world that was like full of scarcity and difficult. You had to really work hard to get a little bit of dopamine back in the days, and nowadays we're in this world of abundance where you get dopamine all the time and it's difficult for our brains to sort of remain rational and make the right decisions in this world that we haven't actually been built for, or that we haven't quite evolved into yet from a neuroscience point of view. And from a cybersecurity point of view, from a vulnerability, susceptibility factors of what makes us vulnerable to these online manipulation attempts or social engineering attempts, there are many, many, many. It's not just a lack of training. And the ones that I looked at or that I categorized before are about 33 that span different categories, from cognitive reasons to psychological, even situational. Like you are more susceptible if you are faced with a phishing email in the afternoon. For example, in my Uber car, it was definitely in the afternoon. I was hangry, I haven't had dinner yet. That makes the rest of us more susceptible to these kind of things. But then also demographics, the older you are, the younger you are, you're more vulnerable. And there's multiple other factors, just cognitive biases, by the way, which are just these shortcuts that our brains have developed so that we save energy. And it makes sense most of the time, but sometimes these heuristics, they also make us do things that are not in our best interest. And there are more than 200 cognitive biases that scientists have documented, and many of those apply in the digital space or online space as well. We get tricked by our own minds to do something quickly or to believe in something just because it seems plausible or the storyline sounds plausible. Here's just some of the cognitive biases that I often talk about. Optimism bias is a famous one where people just generally, we think bad things only happen to other people. So we don't believe that I can be a victim of cybercrime. Or truth bias, generally we humans, and it's actually a nice thing, right? It's we tend to first believe whatever we hear. That's like our initial default is, I meet a new person, I want to trust that person, I want to believe what he or she's got to say. Unfortunately, in the internet or in digital spaces, that's not the right attitude to go about. But this is ingrained into our brains. Dunning-Kruger effect is another. I love it because particularly us who work in technology, in IT security, we think, we're the greatest, we know everything, we can't fall for these scammers. And that makes us, especially this arrogance or overconfidence of thinking that we can't be caught out, makes us especially vulnerable. So there's a lot of different biases that are apply, and that the criminals exploit on purpose, because they, unlike us, have had training in psychology, and they've got playbooks and sort of 101 training in how to abuse those those built-in wired kind of automatic responses. Something I've already alluded to is the plausibility effect. There was this deepfake that went around by Taylor Swift, and she looks 20 years younger, and it's really not well done, but lots of people fell for it because it looked plausible enough. It sounded plausible enough. And the scam was, you know, she partnered up with, I think it was Le Creuset kitchenware, and you could win by just paying the delivery fee, you could get a free kitchenware, and people just paid. And obviously they never got it because it seemed plausible to them enough that Taylor Swift would partner with a reputable company like that. Something else that also applies particularly with the politicians, and I've used him before. He's just such a great example. So Donald Trump is a brilliant manipulator. You know, we think that he might be a bit simple in terms of the way he talks, but that's all on purpose. So the more you hear something repeated, and you must listen to Donald Trump, he repeats the same simple words all the time. That is propaganda from the playbook as it comes, because there's another effect that applies, the mere exposure effect, that the more often you see something or hear something, by the way, this also applies to people, the more often you meet someone, the more you will like them, even if you didn't like it or them in the beginning. And I find that's fascinating from a political propaganda point of view, how this gets used to manipulate and polarize people. And then lastly, also, you know, if something is easy to process, and emotional content, by the way, is often really easy to process because it hits straight into our sort of primal brain where we feel something. If you look at a very sad looking picture, or you feel like you feel nervous or anxiety when something is stressful, we understand it viscerally. We literally can feel what the message is about. And that means we believe it more so than if it's just factual. So now it's really dangerous. By the way, I think this is one of the most dangerous things, particularly because in social engineering, what the scammers do is often use emotive content. And emotional content is so powerful because we understand it, we process it much quicker than like, I don't know, technical or scientific content. And then we believe it's true. This is fascinating. It's that illusory truth effect. And here it is. Yeah, emotional content literally reaches our judgment system much quicker than before logic can even intervene. And that's also why, you know, if you think about it, amygdala hijack, this is like a very famous social engineering goal, is where they want us to be flooded with emotional, for example, stress hormones that get released through the amygdala, or the amygdala rather sends information to your glands that releases cortisol, and that the amygdala, which is our stress response center, gets triggered when something is both like highly emotional content, both negative and positive, by the way. Like even if we get excited, or somebody's flirting with us, or flattery can also cause this amygdala hijack where we then don't act rationally anymore. And then my question, like in my research in the cyber psychology space, was, well, if we have all these human vulnerabilities, and traditional training, including the training that I've worked on, was very much, you'd rationally try to explain to people the danger of the cyberspace, and then explain to them what to do rationally. But we're not dealing with rational beings. We are with, in behavioral science, they call it, we are not, icons, we are econs, we are emotional beings. So how do we patch that, right? Like, how do we address it? It's not just with traditional rule-based training. And obviously being in cyber, we want to know how do we patch this vulnerability. And the interesting thing is that, and I'm very interested in mindfulness as a concept, because I believe that when the vulnerability, for example, is such as related to being distracted, being multitasking, being non-present, being too reactive to your cognitive biases, your heuristic thinking, all of those kind of impulsive kind of behaviors, mindfulness has been proven to improve all of those, including things like your personality traits and things that we might think you can never change. But, and this is not me saying, this is like what I found in the literature, is that practicing mindfulness, and this is by no means doing 10 hours of meditation or something. It's just little things that can be incorporated into your daily life, even while working on a computer. It can reduce your stress levels. It will improve your cognitive abilities, and it will get you into what's called a meta-awareness or present moment state. And it will help you to emotionally regulate any sort of responses. And all of those benefits, if we then map those across the susceptibility factors, mindfulness can address 23 out of those 33 vulnerability factors that I've just mentioned. And I think this is really fascinating because it's a very different way of looking at the problem, where we agree as humans are susceptible, we are vulnerable by our nature, but there are tools, including mindfulness, that can help us improve some of this cognitive and psychological vulnerability. And, mindfulness, like sometimes people say, oh, Anna, this sounds like woo-woo. What do you mean by that? And so another term for that in the security space is, well, if we think about, zero trust principles, which come from the networking side, where basically systems are configured as such that by default, they will not trust anything until they have verified it. If we apply this to the human mind, that's where mindfulness comes in again, because it means, can we cultivate a zero trust mindset where people, they're not super paranoid and become like unfriendly people, not at all, but it just creates that sort of healthy dose of skepticism, slowing down when you feel triggered, understanding our own susceptibility factors, our own emotional reactions, sort of an understanding of ourselves, and engaging with content much more intentionally and less automatic and sort of impulsively. And then, this is really what I'm working on now with for under Carrie Lynn and Lynn in the research, is to look at, well, how can we create this zero trust mindset or this digital mindfulness in a way that it becomes second nature, so that it's not cognitively effortful? Because one of the biggest problems we have is, obviously, you can't tell somebody, you know what, you need to just take a pause before you work through your emails, because if you get 500 emails a day, that doesn't work. But what mindfulness or digital mindfulness and a zero trust mindset is all about is that, you build that awareness, or you build that knowledge in a way that you automatically know when it's dangerous and when you need to slow down. For example, when you are emotionally triggered. And the best analogy I can give for that is, I'm based in Cape Town. I'm not saying that Cape Town is much safer than Johannesburg, not at all. But in my system, somehow, maybe that's heuristics again, I kind of think when I land in Johannesburg, I need to be more careful. So I automatically become more vigilant. Like, I automatically put my handbag in the boot or on the bottom of my car. In Cape Town, I don't do that. So like this kind of understanding, this automatic increased vigilance is what I'm talking about in terms of creating a second nature digital zero trust or digital mindfulness mindset. And, like, particularly when we think about AI and the attackers using automation and emerging technology to make their attacks more sophisticated, it's very, very hard for the human brain to, maybe in a fast way, to discern whether something is false or real, or whether it's manipulated or not. And I think that's actually also not the question. Like, everything nowadays is somewhat AI beefed up. Like, even my pictures might have a filter on it and you look better. So everything has some sort of AI fingerprint. So the question shouldn't be, is something AI generated or not? It should be, do I have the cognitive flexibility to know when I might be manipulated, or when the storyline is potentially deceptive, and then slow down and look at things from a different perspective. And some of the habits that could be cultivated in an organizational setting is to teach people how bad multitasking is, right? Like, multitasking is really the evil of a lot of other things. It's not just makes you more susceptible to scams. It also makes you do other errors. It really it will limit your productivity. It even has mental health issues. Like if somebody media multitasks too much, it can cause depression because there's an addictive element to it. So teaching people how to go back to like a single tasking mode and remove a lot of the distraction that our modern world sort of loves to build around us is a really good tactic to keep us more focused and less susceptible. Teaching people to develop this self and meta awareness, like really explaining, you know, the emotional impact or the emotional side and tactics used by social engineering, and showing examples and letting people analyze, you know, what type of emotion was triggered when they failed a test, for example. This is what one of our customers, a bank in Johannesburg, they do that really well, where when the people who fail these phishing tests multiple times, they go into like a remediation training, but the training is not like a very punitive one. It's more about asking, hey, what was wrong? Like, what happened in that moment when you clicked there, and were you distracted, or was it an emotion that was triggered there? And through that, really explaining to the people that made the mistakes what makes them vulnerable, and to make sure that that doesn't happen the next time. And then the importance of pausing, right? And a pause could be as simple as just taking a 3-second exhale or a 6-second exhale. Like breath work is so powerful. And you know, people will laugh and say, Anna, like, really, can you do breath work to protect yourself in cyber? And I believe yes, like it's a human approach to teach people when something feels too good to be true, when something you know, makes you angry or triggers another emotion, whether that's fear, whatever it might be, when somebody tries to pressurize you and tries to rush you, all of those are signals that you might be manipulated. And to snap out of this automatic response, that's where the pausing, the power of breathing, and the power of just taking those few seconds of pausing is so powerful. And then I know that you're all professionals, so the question is always, okay, how is this all good and well, all theory, but how do we actually get this into organizations? And how do we really, you know, get people to adapt this and change their behavior? Because as we know, you know, humans are creatures of habit. We're lazy. We don't really want to change. I think we only change 2 or 3 habits a year if we're lucky. So it's hard to get people to do things differently. And again, I think we can look at the academics or at science. This is BJ Fogg. He's the father of behavior design. And he says, you know, there's a few things that you need in order to get people to change their behavior. And he came up with this model, the Fogg behavior model. And basically what this says is, in order to get people to change, you need to motivate them. You have to somehow engage them that it's, for example, personally relevant to them. We always talk about this in cybersecurity, right? Like we have to get the message to our users in a way that they actually want to learn this, because it might affect them at home. Any parents are at the moment anyway, everybody is worried about, how do I control my children on devices, how do I keep them safe? So this is kind of stuff that people are really interested in. But then we can't just scare them and educate them. We also have to equip them with the right tools and the ability to do the right thing. And what that means, like a tool could be something simple as like a password manager, but it could also be the fact that you teach someone how to breathe if you get emotionally triggered. That's another tool in your toolbox, to you know, help people understand that that's like a reaction that you need to do before you respond to these things. And then we need a third thing, according to BJ Fogg, to get people to change, and that's a nudge or a prompt, like a reminder to every once in a while get them to do the right thing. So those are the 3 things we need: motivation, ability or tools, and a prompt to get people to change behavior. And you know, ultimately those things have to come together to get people to change. And you know, if we, again, behavior design is really interesting when it comes to prompts and nudges. A lot of our prompts, by the way, are inbuilt. They're actually internal. Like the impulse of picking up your phone 85% of the time, it's not a notification, it's an impulse, a built-in habit. We've habituated our systems to, for example, as soon as you walk to the coffee man or the coffee person, that you check your phone. Or as soon as you get into the car, you check your phone. Whatever that is, it's an inbuilt habit that's actually very unhealthy with the phone checking. But those are nudges or prompts that can help people to do the right thing in the right moment. So this is really, that habit building is really important in the good way, create the good habits and replace the bad habits. And by the way, when we talk about habits, what I feel is one of the most important advantages or benefits of phishing simulations. And I know that there's controversial, oh, just give me 1 second. I just have to tell my daughter she needs to switch the oven off. Sorry. Sorry. So the phishing simulations, one of the biggest benefits that they have is habit building, like teaching people how to deal with bad emails. Because let's face it, our technology should be so good that they shouldn't be getting a lot of real scam emails or phishing emails. So let's say they only get one a year, they don't know anymore how to deal with those emails. So you have to expose them frequently to how bad or malicious scams or emails look like, so that they build that habit of how to deal with it. And that's the prevalence effect that applies when people don't get exposed enough to the bad things, the simulated bad things. They lose all interest, and that optimism bias comes in, and they think it won't apply to them anymore. So we have to actually expose them in a safe way to these scams. Other prompts that apply are so-called cues or prompts that can be built into emails. And what's really critical here is that if you get, and you all have it, this sort of, this email is from external and the red banner, if that gets applied to every single email, your brain will just switch it off. So you can't use it too often, because then fatigue creeps in and we'll just ignore it. So it has to be only in certain situations where it makes sense to remind people or prompt them. And then also teaching people habit stacking, like doing certain things. When you receive the suspicious email, report it. You get instant feedback. If you get instant feedback, you get a dopamine hit, and it helps with the habit creation. So creating healthy habits, digital mindfulness habits, is one way to get people to adopt to this new behavior. And how do we build these security cultures? We still have to educate people. There's still a lot of people that will not know the impact of what it means to, for example, hand over information when they get asked for, or clicking on things that they shouldn't be clicking on. So we have to still create the awareness and the education, but then we need to practice it, right? Like really create that habit, as I mentioned, with the phishing simulations. We have to empower people. We have to make it really easy to do the right thing. Sometimes in security, unfortunately, we're the ones that make things more difficult. People hate one-time pins and OTPs and MFA and all of this, even though, it's so important, but people, they prefer convenience over security. So we have to, wherever we can, make things easier for them, or as much as possible. Using these cues, as I mentioned, in very specific and intelligent manners, not all the time. Also creating the psychological safety that it's okay for people to ask and slow down and verify, and also sometimes fail and have the, not get fired immediately when they make a mistake. And ultimately, cognitive security is, yes, there is that human element, and we have to cultivate and foster this sort of zero trust mindset. But at the same time, we also we do realize, like, there has to be a sort of collaboration with the technology and AI, etc. So it's really about combining advanced technologies, using technologies where possible, with the human element to provide that sort of meta and situational awareness and resilience. And I think where we can learn from are from countries that have identified cognitive security or cognitive resilience as like a part of their national defense infrastructure. So for example, Finland, you know, they are just incredible in terms of how they incorporate critical thinking in their curriculums from kindergarten on to, you know, university level, because they know that the propaganda and the Russian disinformation that gets spewed at their citizens will not stand a chance if they teach citizens how to think critically, how to slow down, how to verify, how to not believe everything that their emotions might tell them. So it's really interesting to learn from other countries and organizations that have identified this as like a defense criteria. And then also ultimately, you know, we as security professionals, we know there's not one silver bullet. You know, anyone who says, oh, buy my product or do my one training and we'll magically fix everything, I don't want to use the word now, but you know, that's not, that doesn't exist. So it is ultimately defense in depth. It's a layered approach that also applies to the human vulnerability level. We can't just do one thing and expect this to magically disappear. But we have to bring all the things, all the puzzle pieces together from the defense side, like, you know, using the tech to prevent from real attacks even arriving at our people, to educate them. We have to empower them and protect them, that even when they make mistakes, it doesn't, you know, bring down the whole organization, and that we learn from mistakes, etc. So it's important to remember that it's really this layered kind of defense and depth that will ultimately help us to build the human firewall, the manage the human risk level. And that's it in terms of my talk. I know we still have time for questions, but to summarize, it really, I think the most important message is that, remember, social engineers and cyber criminals, they know that we are soft human beings with psychological and cognitive vulnerabilities, and they tap into that. If you look at a playbook that a pig butchering scammer uses, the scammer, him or herself, they don't understand it, but the playbook that's been developed by these syndicates very much understands how to use things like intermittent reinforcement. You know, like in romance scams or sextortion scams, sometimes they are nice to the target, sometimes not. They create this addictive kind of dependency. So there is so much psychological manipulation and deception built into those scams that we as defenders have to also understand how they operate and how we can help our humans or help ourselves and our families to build that cognitive defense, or that sort of mindfulness in a digital space. And we can use science. You know, we can learn from the behavioral scientists, we can learn from the psychologists and others to influence and change people's behavior. And ultimately, it's obviously it's the defense in depth, and it has to be that sort of digital mindfulness plus the AI and the tech collaboration to get us to a healthy or mature security culture. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna, for that great talk. Really, really highlighting just how complex the cybersecurity issue is with people. There's so many different layers. And I think particularly when it comes to cybersecurity, you know, if we talk about behavior change in general, one of the ways that people will change their behavior is if the new behavior is seen to benefit them and benefit their lives. And so many people, the mindset is still security is in the way of me getting my job done. Here's an extra thing I need to do, an extra obstacle. So to break through that mindset in the first place is challenging. And then to say, oh, well, this is the new behavior you should be incorporating, is to get past that mindset of cybersecurity is beneficial for you and for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in our personal lives, you know, I've been busy doing this roadshow with like one of our local banks, and you know, even the banks where you think, well, this is people's money, this is really, like, I'm very worried about my internet banking, and you know, even there, it's always that battle between convenience and safety, right? So and that's our own. I mean, and there's a saying in German, it says like it's your own Schweinehund, which means like it's your own lazy creature that you have to like get out to basically force to do the right thing. Because if you wait for the motivation to come, it's not, it won't happen. So you need to like kind of make a system to say, well, Monday morning I'll take my 2 hours and I change my passwords and I set up my MFA and whatever it might be, because it is tedious, but it's so important, to use those features.
Great. We've got quite a few questions for you. One from Tony Parry. So he's talking about the zero trust concept in respect of human awareness is quite interesting. However, isn't there possibly a consequent risk that you ignore or disregard valid communications, so false positive scenarios, but also understanding that it may be far less risky to get a false positive rather than fall for the negative?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Tony. And it's actually, it's so funny because talk about, different motivations in companies is you have the security department, then you have internal communications and HR who always, not always, but often break all the rules, like they will send out a link to some random thing or use very spammy kind of wording. So it's very important to, again, work at this, not just in isolation, but work with the comms department and anyone who sends out communications internally to make sure, okay, how do we establish trust signs? Like, how do we make sure that people know this is a way that it really comes from the person that we say it comes from. Also from a training point of view, to incorporate that in your phishing simulations. I know now, when I receive an email from my boss, I always slow down because our IT guys will try and catch me out all the time using emails from my boss that she rejects my vacation application, like all of these really emotional charged ones. But so I've habituated myself that I have to slow down when I see an email that comes from Kathy, because it could be a simulation. But so I think it's important to work with them and come up with internal communication standards that take into account what people need to look for to have those trust cues.
Great point. Thanks, Anna. A second question from Ricky. Hi, Ricky. Can a gamified approach play a role in the prompt phase of achieving behavior change?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, I always think, gamified approaches are not just having games, it's also using leaderboards and, things that people like. For example, some of our customers, what they do in October for Awareness Month is they have these phishing tournaments where they tell everyone, okay, we're going to send out, so many fishes this month. And the people who will spot them, but don't just spot them and report them, but also tell us what made you spot it and what were the emotional triggers, for example. They all go into like a draw. So that way, and in a way, I find phishing simulations are actually gamified, because in my case, I know I get 1 or 2 every week. And by now, it doesn't waste my time, because it takes 2 seconds and I report it, because it's just a click of a button. And it really makes it, you're building that muscle, you're building that recognizing and creating the right behavior muscle of, okay, I'm spotting the email, I need to click and report it. And then you get that instant feedback, which is also the gamification part, the dopamine that I mentioned, where, excuse me, where the message will say, well done, you're keeping the company safe, and, like that little pat on the shoulder. We like it, we're humans, you need to tap into that habit building. So yeah, gamification does work.
Yeah, I love that. Incentive and getting people to engage and actually be on the lookout. Right, a question from Richard Frost. From experience, I see a lot of corporate user awareness is very flat, catering for all in the company, but not many people do specialized training for different teams like devs or exco, the ones that need it most. There's also a focus in ISO and NIST. What are solutions doing to add this feature, and how do we enforce the need for exco to do this training when they see it as a distraction and time consuming?
Yeah. I know, like it's so true. I think first of all, that the training has to be role-based. You cannot force an executive to go through a 15-minute compliance thing that's not relevant to them, right? The same, like if you have a young culture in a call center, make it a little bit more culturally appropriate and a more fun and maybe shorter, TikTok style, whatever works in it, but it absolutely, like, the training can't just be a generic one. And I get it sometimes, like once a year, maybe there's this compliance policy training that everybody has to do, fine. But these refresher, more sort of in the moment trainings, and this is again Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, right? Like, it's much more relevant, it's much more effective if you do little bits of training frequently than one big massive training. And for those little bits of training frequently, that needs to be role-based and relevant. So definitely for the the execs, what they want to know, if you think about it, and I'm sorry, my voice is going, I think, like, they're only interested in three things, like board members, execs. They want to know what's the impact, like what's the risk, what's it going to cost us, then what was it, the risk, the impact, and then the opportunity. There could be opportunity as well, right? Like, how can this help the business? So when you communicate to the execs, try and do it in that manner, and also showing examples from industries that you're in to make it relevant. The retail, when we had all these breaches now in the UK against Costco and all the big retailers, the local retailers, I know that the execs, they read those news. They know they were the awareness is right there. The other thing I found super interesting, security. We are security professionals. We love to talk about the CIA triad. An executive is not interested in the I or the confidentiality. What they're interested in, a retail environment I'm talking about, they're interested in the availability. So if you communicate to them, you have to say, you know what, Marks and Spencer's online trading is still not available. Look at what the impact was to the business. That's how we have to do the training, right? Talk in their language. And yeah, we can't expect them to do like a generic training. And sometimes, I do obviously work for a platform provider, and we do have a lot of different training on our platform. But sometimes I feel, particularly for the execs, it's more effective if you do even if it's just a 15-minute, if you can get in front of their faces with a presentation. What's really good, if you have someone, I did this for some of our customers, actually, Kerry, when you were in Cape Town, if they a good sport, try and make a deep fake of them to show them, to show them how easy it is and how good it looks like. The South African accents, by the way, are still very difficult to fake. It sounds very Indian or weird, but those kind of things are I think are effective.
Great. Another question from Tony Mwai. The analogy about being more vigilant when you're in different cities or environments makes sense, but just as we relax when we're back in familiar territory, how can we ensure digital mindfulness is long-lasting in the appropriate context, not just at work, but also in our personal lives?
Yeah, that's a very good question, huh? So I think, again, like in my view, mindfulness applies when and if we need it. So we can't be, totally present and focus all the time. It's not possible. We've not been built for it. But to realize and to practice, practice that habit when you notice, and the way you do it, it's called interoception. So it's that awareness of something is changing. There's an emotion that I'm feeling, even if some people cannot even name their emotions, not looking at the mail, guys. No, I'm joking. But trauma survivors, for example, really disassociate often from their bodies, and they will struggle to even realize that they're feeling something. So it's important to hone that ability to realize, hey, my heart rate's going faster. Why is that? Oh, is this message triggering me? Or is this social media post I'm reading that it's really riling me up? Then slow down, And that could happen when you're at your most relaxed and you're just Instagram surfing at night or whatever you might be doing, to just create that self-awareness that when something just feels too good, or even if it's confirming your own beliefs or your own biases, that is actually manipulation. Yeah.
Great. Then there's a question from Elizabeth Ayati. Do you think the older generation will ever develop the cognitive or digital mindfulness needed to protect themselves from cyber attacks, considering their increased vulnerability?
Yeah, and there's something I feel as an industry we have to do something about this, because the extent of the organization and the automation of these pig butchering scams and investment scammers that are targeting the elderly, and the way they're going about it is it's so heartless and without empathy, and very, very sophisticated in a psychological way again. Is that we need to do outreach work, go into all the old age homes, and I know that the Women in Cyber group last year, they've done some of it, but I think more needs to be done to explain the tactics that are being used by these scammers. Actually, only today I had my neighbor telling me his mother-in-law got scammed, and is there something we can send out to all the elderly people in the neighborhood? So it's so rife, and it's actually not the technology that they need to know about. Is we have to teach them about, what if somebody is overly nice to you over the phone, they have information about you, it's those emotional, the psychological tactics that they deploy. That's much more important to teach them about than, how to hover over a link or click. And obviously, and I mean, even my dad-in-law, who my parents-in-law get evangelized by me all the time, but he also said, this lady was so friendly and she was flirting with me, and I really believed she meant well. I'm like, no, they don't mean well. They follow a playbook. So it's important to teach them about these those emotional tactics.
And absolutely ruthless. I mean, these scammers with the elderly as well, life savings gone. It's terrible. So I agree with you there. It's many multi-layered solutions that are needed, not just in companies, but in society as well. And I think it circles back to the zero trust mindset, which I think might seem harsh or sound harsh initially, but it's not about getting rid of trust. It's about establishing trust, making sure that the person you're talking to is who they say they are, does have your best interests, that it's not a scammer at the end of the day. But I'm just conscious of time. Is there any final question for Anna? We've got a minute, less than a minute. Otherwise, thank you so much, Anna, for giving of your time tonight. Thank you for an incredibly interesting presentation. It's always fantastic to listen to you. Thank you as well to... thanks so much for joining us. And thank you to Calvin Hlapo, the acting CEO of IITPSA, for hosting us tonight as well. And of course, thank you to everyone here as well. Thank you for attending, and we hope to see you again at our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.